Have you ever wondered which country first colonized Africa? Most people immediately think of Britain or France during the scramble for Africa in the late 1800s. But the truth is, colonization began much earlier, and the first European power to stake its claim in Africa might surprise you. Let's rewind the clock to the 15th century and uncover the very beginning of colonization on the African continent. When we talk about colonization in Africa, the story is often framed around the scramble for Africa, when European nations rushed to divide the continent at the Berlin Conference in 1884. But Africa's encounter with colonization started centuries before that. It didn't begin with Britain. It didn't begin with France. It all started with a small European kingdom on the edge of the Atlantic Ocean, Portugal. The story begins in the year 1415. Portugal, under King John I, launched an attack on the North African city of Ceuta in present-day Morocco. The city was captured, marking the very first European foothold on African soil. Why Portugal? This was a nation of sailors, explorers, and ambitious leaders. With Prince Henry the Navigator encouraging voyages down the West African coast, Portugal was determined to find new trade routes, spread Christianity, and gain wealth. Ceuta was more than just a military conquest. It was a strategic gateway to African trade, gold, spices, and later something far darker. After Ceuta, the Portuguese didn't stop. They continued exploring and setting up trading posts all along the West African coast. One of the most significant was Elmina Castle, built in 1482 in modern-day Ghana. At first, it was established to control the gold trade, but as time went on, it became one of the largest centers of the transatlantic slave trade. The Portuguese also built forts, ports, and settlements in places like Angola, Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau, Cape Verde, and São Tomé and Príncipe. These weren't just temporary stops. They were permanent strongholds, proof that Portugal wasn't just visiting Africa, they were colonizing it. At first, Portugal's presence in Africa looked like commerce, with trading posts, forts, and naval outposts. But very quickly, that commerce turned into colonization. Portugal didn't just trade with Africans, they began taking control of territories, enforcing their rule, and reshaping economies around European needs. And then came slavery. Portuguese traders were the first to transport enslaved Africans across the seas, first to Portugal itself, then to plantations on Atlantic islands, and eventually to the Americas. This marked the beginning of one of the darkest chapters in human history, the transatlantic slave trade. So while Portugal was small in size compared to later empires, its role as the first colonizer of Africa set the stage for centuries of exploitation. Of course, Portugal didn't stay alone in Africa forever. Spain, the Dutch, the British, the French, and later Belgium, all carved up African territories. But it was Portugal that pioneered the model, combining exploration, conquest, trade, and colonization. And although the scramble for Africa in the 19th century gets the most attention, colonization in Africa had already been going on for nearly 500 years by that point. So, which country colonized Africa first? The answer is Portugal, starting in 1415 with the capture of Ceuta, and continuing with forts and colonies across West and Southern Africa. Their legacy is complicated. On one hand, Portugal opened up new trade routes and global connections. On the other, they laid the foundation for the slave trade and centuries of exploitation. Understanding this history helps us see how Africa's encounter with Europe shaped the world we live in today. It reminds us that history is not just about dates and events. It's about the people, cultures, and consequences that followed. Knowing where colonization began gives us perspective on the long and often difficult journey of the African continent and its people. If you enjoyed this video and learned something new, make sure to support the channel by liking this video, subscribing, and turning on notifications so you don't miss the next history story. Share this video with others who might be curious about Africa's past. Your support helps me keep creating more content like this.